Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the summer solstice, which occurs on the 21st of June 2022 at 10:14 AM Universal Central Time. Now, based on your locality, please see on the screen when this event is occurring for you. Now, Western tropical astrology is based on the seasons, but if you're based down south in Australia or New Zealand, this will be your winter solstice, but in terms of astrology, it's still the summer solstice because it is a Mediterranean construct. Now, each of the equinoxes and solstices, 4 in total, represent a division of the 360 degrees of the horoscope wheel by 4 cardinal quadrants lasting 13 weeks. So as this event occurs, the sun moves into the sign of Cancer, the second cardinal sign. The first, Aries, is very much about initiation. Cardinal signs are about action. The sign of Cancer is much more to do with consolidation, becoming much more conscious of security, protecting ourselves and nurture. So very much about the environment too. But its influence, of course, will be over the next 4 weeks in terms of the sign of Cancer. But this cardinal quadrant energy will last for 13 weeks, round to the autumnal equinox, which occurs in Libra. The last of the cardinal quadrants occurs in the sign of Capricorn, usually around the 20th or 21st of December, when we have the winter solstice. Now, when we had the spring equinox, the video I shared at that time, I shared the event wheel, and I thought it would be really interesting today to go back and look at what that said we might expect in the following 13 weeks and explore how that played out. Astrologers are very good at claiming things. How many times do people actually scrutinize what we actually claim or predict? And so I'm laying myself open a little bit here so we can look at that particular event chart wheel, and then I'm going to show the event for this June the 21st, this summer solstice. So what I feel will occur over the next 13 weeks. But I'm also going to share this in 2 different ways. So I'm going to share the technical chart in equal house, which in fact has an ascendant of 29 degrees 5 minutes in Leo. So it's on the Antarctic point. So there's no 30 degrees in astrology, because obviously as we get to the 30th degree, that's the first degree. So 29, 59 minutes, then we go to the next degree. So it is very late in Leo, and that means that Saturn is on the other end of the axis, and obviously Saturn is a very influential planet because it can be about boundaries, limitations and structures. So I will explore that. But the second wheel I'm going to show simplifies things and thinks of the zodiac in terms of Aries being the first sign, round to Pisces being the 12th, and we can look at how things will affect us all collectively in terms of that overall impact. So I hope that will give you 3 pieces of information that you will find helpful. And finally, I'm then going to forecast what each of the zodiac signs can expect over this 13-week period, from Aries through to Pisces. But you can watch these in terms of the sun or the ascendant or both. The choice is entirely yours. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm nearly at the 100,000 mark in terms of subs with YouTube. If you've already subscribed, thank you so much. If you've yet to do so, I'd be enormously privileged. Please click or tap the bell notification symbol. Also, if you would like to understand how Sirius astrology can be such an incredible help to you in your personal journey, if you give me 3 pieces of personal data of time, date and place of birth, I can give you a roadmap that can guide you for the rest of your life. Also, I'll give you a 12-month forecast. These charts are based absolutely on you only, so no 2 charts are the same. and there's 30% off with my special package. Please see the link beneath this video. So first up, let's just have a little look at what the spring equinox told us. And the ascendant was in the sign of Virgo, which is very much about order and precision, meticulousness. But the sun, of course, 0 degrees in Aries, and there you can see on the screen it was in the 7th house in equal house, which is very much how we relate to people. Now there was one standout really positive influence in this chart, and you can see it's between Mercury and Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter in its home zone in Pisces, where it's the traditional ruler. Mercury not at its best in Pisces. That can lead to distortion and confusion. But Jupiter conjunct Mercury in the 7th house gave me some hope that there could be some negotiated settlement in the Ukraine. The problem was that this chart also reveals that Mars in the sign of Aquarius, where of course at 10 degrees it's just moved into the 2nd decan there, so it's much more to do with communication. But Mars is about action, and of course it's about instant gratification. It doesn't often think about things too much. It really works on instinct, and you can see that Mars is squaring with Uranus. Uranus in the sign of Taurus square Mars, and that unfortunately is one of the most destructive influences you can get for warfare, because Uranus in the 9th house is about foreign territory. You can see the node is also in the 9th house as well, and the midheaven, so that's the point where we connect with the world at large, is also in Taurus, even though it's represented here in the 9th house. It is actually the 10th house point. That's squared along with the North Node by Saturn in the 6th house. You can just see in Aquarius, but you can see that the position of Mars and also Venus are in a square with Uranus. So we have a lot of tension. The 6th house is about order. It's also about the physical domain. It can be about organization. So although Venus and Mars together is a very evocative combination, very potentially alluring, they're in a square with Uranus. So 6th, 9th creates a lot of tension. And part of the tension of Uranus in the 9th house is it wants to do exactly what it wants to do. It doesn't want to be governed by any rules and regulations. The 9th house, very much to do with the rule of law. The 6th house and that energy of Mars squaring with Uranus, an incredible amount of brittle tension. And then Saturn in that square with the North Node. The North Node is almost like our common destiny in the 9th house. So we've got big squabbles going on over territories. Obviously Taurus is earth, ground, physical borders. The 9th house is very much to do with international borders. So the node and the midheaven in a conjunction squaring with Saturn. So those are real stress points. And also you can see that the moon's in the 2nd house. We've all been thinking about everyday money. The moon is our emotional world, our homes, and that's been squared by Pluto in the 5th house of risk. So we have a tension between the moon and Pluto, and Pluto is a very ruthless planet potentially, and that has been having a huge impact on people's domestic budget, the 2nd house of everyday money. 5th house is where we like to enjoy ourselves, but there's a transformation going on there. We can't enjoy ourselves as freely and as in a low cost way, or at least a more effectively cost effective way than we have in the past, because costs have gone up. So we've had an impact on household budgets, but also obviously in terms of the Ukraine, there's been a huge amount of destruction of people's personal homes and property. So although this chart did give us some hope, which I did raise in my forecast, between the conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune, about talking things through, the more warlike energies and tense energies unfortunately have been played out over the last 13 weeks. So that's how the cardinal quadrant works. So let's now have a look at what we can expect on this next event. Now the interesting thing is, you already know that I've shared that the ascendant is 29 degrees 5 minutes in Leo, but you can see that the North Node, Venus, the path of fortune and Mercury are all in the 10th house. Now Mercury in its home zone in Gemini in the 10th house points towards the potential for discussion, and you can see that Jupiter is in a terrific angle to Mercury. So Mercury in a sextile to Jupiter can be very good for contracts, and also Jupiter is pretty close to the Moon, and that can be a very generous combination. Let's hope something generous does unfold, because unfortunately you can see Saturn in its retrograde in Aquarius through to the 23rd of October. That's in a grindingly difficult right angle to Venus and the North Node still. The 10th house on this chart once more is in Taurus, but at 17 degrees you can see that Uranus is very close to it, so very unsettled conditions in the world environment, but also the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon is at 16 degrees in the sign of Taurus, so that's conjunct Uranus. So hey, and Uranus, the midpoint in the 9th house of international affairs. So I think we're going to continue to see turbulence, and I feel that Saturn in the sign of Aquarius is the collective. It affects us all, because Aquarius is the sign of us as a group. So that square between Saturn and Venus, Venus very much about money, especially in its home zone in Taurus, in the 10th house. So all of us are going to continue to feel the pinch, and I think a much more severe financial crunch is developing, unfortunately. I don't want to put a fearful message out there, but I just feel it is almost inevitable. But what does the sign of Cancer, or the Sun being in the sign of Cancer, give us? Well, you can see that actually the Sun is in a quincunx with Pluto. Pluto very late, so it's nearly in Aquarius, where it will move temporarily in 2023. So the Sun and Pluto in a quincunx creates in itself a lot of tension. So if we think about this chart in terms of the event, the Sun is in the 11th house of the collective, and Pluto's in the 5th house of how we want to enjoy ourselves. So I think we need to rethink that. We're not going to be able to enjoy ourselves quite as freely as we would like, but if we can develop the theme of care and trying to find ways to nurture situations. So the Sun in Cancer can be obviously very good for that over the next 4 weeks immediately, but over the next 13 weeks, I think there's going to be much more awareness of the emotional impact of everything that we're dealing with, of poverty, of shortages, of the impacts of the war. And I feel that COVID is going to be reignited. Unfortunately, I think it is going to be getting out and about more than it has been. Neptune, which was in a conjunction with the Moon on the world chart at the start of 2020, when COVID really started to get going, you know, very much to do with sort of invisible infections. You can see that's in the 8th house of mortality. It is actually forging a terrific link with Pluto, and Pluto and Venus are forging a wonderful trine. So we could say that certain relationships that are based on depth and sincerity can thrive during this next 13-week period, and there could be some contracts to be made which are helpful, with Mercury in that lovely link with Jupiter, and more broadly with the Moon. And the more nurturing energies of the Sun can be helpful, but I feel that with the position of Saturn towards the 7th house, the descendant point, just says that relationships for a lot of people are going to be quite tense, particularly international affairs. So I feel that that's the area that's going to continue to be very unsettled. Now I wanted to show you a more simple wheel now on the screen, and that shows the Sun in the 4th house, Mercury in the path of fortune in the 3rd, but you can see Venus, the North Node, and Uranus in the midpoint, all in house 2, which is everyday finance. And you can see that Saturn retreating in Aquarius is in house 11, the collective. So because Saturn is squaring Venus, the North Node, and also Uranus is on the midpoint, and in turn in a square with Saturn, I think that the financial impacts that we're going to experience over the next 13 weeks are going to continue to be quite strong. Now you can see that Mars, Chiron, Jupiter and the Moon are all in Aries, which is very much about trying to find new ways, new thrusts, new enthusiasm to guide our direction in life in a more enterprising way. So there's definitely opportunities, but I feel that the nub of where we are at the moment is, in terms of the natal chart, very restless conditions internationally and in terms of the world at large. And in terms of our personal situation, a greater amount of contraction in terms of financial growth and an increase, unpredictably at times, of costs. But there are still opportunities to be, to show endeavour, to show imagination, and to try to use Uranus in the second house to be inventive about the way we use resources. And sometimes that can mean just changing our mindset. If we change our mindset or our approach around 4 or 5 key areas of our life, we can make some savings, and we could actually make ourselves healthier in some ways, say by cooking from scratch. But if you're really trying to get by on not enough money, there is nothing worse than that, and that's a very challenging situation for the world economy and for everyone's personal household finances too. And I think it's very important that I am truthful about that. Now, please stay with me for the individual forecast for each of the 12 zodiac signs, starting with Aries. Now, Aries, you can see that having Mars in your sign in its dignity is a great place for it to be, because that's bringing to the fore that natural instinctiveness that you've got as a cardinal sign. You are a leader, and that means that when you get an instinct to go for something, you can often have the courage to make it happen. Other people are navel-gazing, analysing, really doing so much due diligence that the opportunity is whizzed by. So this set of influences is suggesting that you can show a lot of gumption over the next 13 weeks. And it's obviously great having Jupiter with you at this point, although of course it is going to go into retrograde in due course. But I think Mars is very close to Chiron. Chiron's very much about our physicality, or our health. And if there is something that you've been sort of getting by around, I think maybe Mars is encouraging you to take action to get the treatments or the help. And perhaps there's been a delay in your treatment due to COVID, which has created a backlog in your procedure or your appointment being met, and hopefully greater urgency is going to come to bear. Now, because the Sun obviously is in the 4th house, it wouldn't be a surprise therefore if you were thinking about where you live, how you live there and whom with, but the cost obviously is part of the equation. But having Mercury in its home zone of Gemini means that your mind is going to be very nimble, and that's going to be very helpful to you. So a time for you to take the initiative, but also being orientated towards ensuring that your emotional foundations or your emotional world is the centre of your personal celestial universe. Now for you, Taurus, obviously the cardinal point in the sign of Cancer is the 3rd house, which is when things speed up. Having all that energy in your sign is probably making you quite restless, and then having Saturn in the part of your chart to do with your worldly interaction means there could be a lot of discussions. There's going to be applications you're putting in, or proposals, or you're going to be working on your own technology or ideas, and you can be very inventive. But it's a surprising time for you, because I feel there's a bit of a mix, a bit of a contrast going on. Some of it's about being in the present and reinventing yourself in some way, but some of it's also about making the most of a huge amount of past experience, knowledge, connections, and even relationships, but in a way which is remodeling you're approaching the here and now. Now, I know I've said this a few times before, so I apologise if it sounds repetitive. Don't forget that your ruler, Venus, is in a gorgeous link with Pluto on this particular event. So if romance is an important thing for you, I think it could be someone at a distance, or someone who seems to cut through and really get to the nub of situations in a way which you find quite inspiring. So someone could really have a big impact on you through their ideas, or it could just be in terms of their raw energy, even sexual energy. But your thoughts may still in some way be going back to someone from your past, or perhaps you're working through a separation. It could have happened a very long time ago, but its energy is still very evocative. But you do have an opportunity to really get to a point of truth over the next 13 weeks about relationships, and that's exciting. But I think balancing your need to be an individual with how you fit in with the wider world is another subplot that you're going to be grappling with over this period of time. Now, Gemini, for you, obviously having Mercury in your own sign is terrific. The Sun's moved into your sector of everyday finance, but Venus, the North Node, Uranus and the midpoint are all in your 12th house. And that points towards your nervous energy still being quite unsettled. Mars, Chiron, Jupiter and the Moon in your 11th house of the collective is brilliant, because that could make you sociable and want to get together with people. But that collection of energy in Taurus is kind of saying to you, you could sort out or become clearer about some of the people you really want more intimately close. I don't necessarily mean in a sexual context, but the people you want to hang out with more regularly. There could be some change going on there, because more fair weather friends are making way for more substantive alliances. And with Saturn in retrograde in your sector of higher truths, I don't think you're going to be particularly in the mood for compromise on this. With Saturn squaring with Venus, squaring with the node, Uranus in the midpoint, this is really making you confront the reality of some even past relationships, and maybe it is a time to really be letting go of something that you've been holding on to for some time. But the Sun in the second house is very much about those more earthy considerations of, you know, the money, and obviously all that Taurus energy very much about the money. The good news is that with Venus in a trine with Pluto, and Pluto being in your 8th house, some kind of legacy could come to you at this time, perhaps linked to a loved one, that actually could be quite a substantive payout. Maybe it's going to be, you know, maybe it is going to be some big insurance policy, or maybe it is something to do with probate or an estate being wrapped up, and somehow you can benefit from someone else's generosity or care that's evolved for you over a long period of time. Now, Cancer, for you, obviously, the fact that the Sun moves into your own sign is great. You also have a throbbing amount of energy in your 11th house of the future. It's exciting. Mars is giving you a lot of extra authority and confidence, along with Jupiter in your 10th house of work. What's not to like? You also have a terrific link between Venus in your sector of the longer term future and your higher values around relationships, and Pluto in your 7th house of relating. It's just the Sun does forge an awkward angle with Pluto. I wouldn't necessarily assume anything around ongoing longer term relationships. I think churn is a word that comes to mind, again because of Uranus being in that 11th house. You're changing. You know, the last couple of years has seen a particular change with you. Essentially, I think that Cancerian people can be quite conservative. I don't necessarily mean with your politics at all. I just mean in terms of the way you like a certain amount of continuity in your life. But I think Pluto has brought some radical and painful change to your relationship since 2008. And there could be another pinch point going on, a bit of politics playing out in one relationship at the moment, particularly if you want something that's very fresh and different and exciting from your future, and your partner wants to maintain the status quo that you always seem to really appreciate. So they may be a bit challenged by the fact that you're pushing back a little bit and wanting to do things on your own terms, or be a lot more engaged by, it could be spiritual interest, I think almost political messages. You know, I think you're becoming more activated by injustices, for example, and you want to have your voice. And if you're with someone or a group of people who prefer the status quo or prefer not to talk about these awkward subjects because they may throw up some unpleasant truths, I think that's something that you could surprise people by being quite outspoken about. Usually in the past you've tended to avoid confrontation. I think at the moment your voice can definitely be found over this next 13-week period. So really exciting. Which brings us to Leo. Now of course for you, Leo, the Sun has moved into your 12th house, which gives you an immediate 4-week period of potential reflection. Saturn's in your 7th house of where you relate in retrograde, but it's in a clash with those planets in the sign of Taurus. So really, it could be some tensions are going to show up in your professional situation. Also, with Mars and Jupiter in your 9th house, if something's become very boring and dull and you're kind of fed up of the games really, there may be part of you, you know, you can, rather like Cancer, be someone who can be surprisingly adherent to a rather, samey's a strong word, but certainly a familiar landscape. And I think this chart is kind of saying to you that when it comes to your work, some big changes could come simply because just going through the processes is actually completely and utterly lost its appeal. But I'm not sure if you're quite ripe to take action over the next 4 weeks, but you might thereafter do so once the Sun moves into your sign in 4 weeks' time. You could really start to make a number of quite significant changes which can get a sense of excitement going, and that's really important in life, that we're not just, you know, eating, sleeping, you know, just going through. That regularity keeps us straight in so many ways, but it also can steal our passion. So make sure that you're inspired by something at the moment, and if you're not feeling inspired by something, find something that does help you to shake up your world to make it somehow more interesting and exciting. But if you do want to mull these things over rather than actually see them through in the most immediate 4 weeks, that wouldn't be an entire surprise. Which brings us to Virgo. Your ruler in this chart is in the 10th house of work. So are you going to do some retraining over the next 3 months? Or are you going to be thinking about your work? Answer, yes, I think you will. The Sun's in your 11th house now of the future. What you want from your long-term future is going to be on your mind. Pluto's in a very passionate and expressive location, forging an amazing link with Venus. You'll take that all day long. There could be one friend that really just love being around, and you could spend some significant time with them. You may even travel with them somewhere really exotic or interesting or adventurous over the next 13 weeks. But with Saturn and Venus in a square, if your truth is being challenged in some way in a relationship by someone's pickiness or brittleness or nitpicking or small-mindedness, that can be a really difficult thing you're going to have to deal with over the next 13 weeks. If someone grinding you down with their sort of narrow view of the world, sometimes you get accused yourself of being more tied up in your thinking with the detail, and that makes you very gifted, particularly in terms of your work and where you provide service to others in a really lovely way. But if you're someone who also wants to bring drama into your life, and I think Uranus suggests that has been the case the last few years, you have been taking more risks, you have been pushing out and doing things in a different way, and someone close to you, in a friend or a romantic partner, is resisting that, that could be the crunch point. But Mars and Jupiter in your 8th house could also point towards your talent for business or entrepreneurship, or if you're footloose and fancy 3, that can see you really, really desiring some passion at the core of your world. You just need to make sure it's the right kind of person, because obviously with Saturn squaring Venus, if you get into a wrong relationship at the moment, it could be punishing. With Venus in a beautiful trine with Pluto, if you get into the right one, it could transform your life forever. So some big stuff developing for you there, Virgo, which takes us to Libra. Now obviously for you, the sign of Cancer is your 10th house, how you connect with the world at large. So anything professional to do with property, ambitions and goals are all coming sharply into focus over the next 13 weeks, but particularly in the next 4 weeks. Now, in terms of Pluto, which of course has been a huge irritant to you for some time, that's in a terrific angle with your ruler Venus, but it's in your 8th house. So if you're doing something around a property matter or some kind of renovations, that can be good. But Saturn, of course, is oppressing your ruler, and Saturn's in your sector of romance. So if you're in a romantic relationship which you're finding profoundly enriching, having Mars and Jupiter in your 7th house could see you pushing back, asserting yourself. Mercury's in your 9th house, so you're going to be able to express yourself well in terms of your opinion, but you're going to be in the spotlight. Your profile is going to rise over the next 13 weeks. I think that's almost inevitable. But I feel if you're feeling unsatisfied in terms of how much money you earn in terms of your talent, that could be something that sees you thinking about making a job switch. And with Mars and Jupiter giving you more confidence to reinforce your boundaries, that's significant. Which brings us to the sign of Scorpio. Now the interesting thing about this event is that the IC, the 4th house cusp, is actually in your sign on this event, and Uranus is opposite it. So whatever's going on in the world at large somehow affects you at home as well. But if we think of your situation with the Sun as the 1st house, and we don't think of that more technical wheel, Saturn's in your 4th house of home, emotion, family, and you've got a whole cluster of energy in your 7th house. In other words, if there's a weakness in a relationship, it's going to be revealed over the next 13 weeks, especially because the Sun's in the 9th house of higher truths. Your modern ruler Pluto forges a great link with Venus, so if you're lucky enough to be having dialogue with someone where you really get each other, you know, there's compelling conversations into the small hours, you really are excited being around this person, terrific. Also, I think your physical vitality can improve with your traditional ruler in the 6th house, along with Chiron and Jupiter. So that's all good. Brings us to Sagittarius. Now, for you, the Sun is in your 8th house to do with big transformations. And so for the next 13 weeks, something about your longer term finances, a business interest, an entrepreneurial strand, that might be something you can grapple with. Mars and Jupiter, your ruler, in your 5th house of risk, on the whole, that's very good. But you have in your sector of work, Venus, the node, Uranus, and the midpoint, and they're all being squared off by Saturn. Your nervous tension issues, which have been quite strong over the last year, I think are going to potentially come into focus again. It doesn't mean to say that you don't have any choices, but if there's a relationship, it could be a professional relationship actually, which is causing strain, you need to perhaps find new ways to deal with that stress, or to come down, or to give you moments of peace and tranquility to rest. But then equally, having Mars and Jupiter in your 5th house of action, perhaps a great way to deal with the stress might be to be more active. So a lot going on with Mercury in your 7th house of relating. Try to keep the lines of communication open as much as you can. Which brings us to Capricorn. The Sun for you and this event triggers your 7th house. It's all about relationships over the next 13 weeks. You have a glorious set of influences in your 5th house of play, demonstrative, romance, affection, warmth, great. You can really represent yourself in quite a glittering way. With Pluto forging a wonderful link with Venus, you could have the most meaningful connection with someone. It's just, unfortunately, your desire to have a good time is probably really going to be cramped by the financial reality that we're all having to deal with, because your ruler in its retrograde is in a square with Venus, node Uranus in the midpoint. So I think being a bit cautious with your resources is something to be mindful of. You do have Mars, which is exalted in your sign, along with Chiron and Jupiter and the Moon in your 4th house. Are you making some changes at home? Because if you are, your timing is impeccable. But it's going to be the relationships with the people that you're working with that are going to be key to this being delivered successfully. So a degree of delicacy, decorum and diplomacy will take you further than trying to force things, especially with Saturn being in your 2nd house. If you feel that the costs are creeping up, try to look at ways that you can do things imaginatively and artistically, but maybe without cutting corners on the structure, you actually still get something that is aesthetically pleasing but a better value for money. Now this is Aquarius, the sun for you in the 6th house, so the next 13 weeks is asking you to look after yourself. Now I'm recording this with COVID, which I shouldn't be doing, but I have to do it because if I get behind, it's such a terrible struggle to catch up with this kind of work. So for me and other water bearers, we need to look at organisation, structures, efficiencies, health, diet, fitness, nutrition over the next 13 weeks. Okay. Also a lot of energy going on in the 4th house. Moving, improving, changing the space physically, decoratively where we live, enjoying the countryside if you're lucky enough to be in the northern hemisphere. If you're in the southern hemisphere, perhaps it's more rugged places that can be, you know, lovely to walk by a lake on a sort of stormy winter's day. Very exciting. But of course Saturn in the sign of Aquarius can create a limitation on neat physical energy, and Pluto's still active in the 12th house of psychology, but it is forging a great link with Venus. Perhaps a dream is suddenly or eventually going to evolve when it comes to where we live. But with Mars and Jupiter in the 3rd house, your ideas sector, along with your personal expression of Mercury exalted in your sign in your 5th house, that's very good. So there's some good stuff there, but it is making sure that, you know, getting the early nights, not overdoing things. So I will, of course, be listening to every single word of my own advice. Which brings us to Pisces. Now, you're the last zodiac sign, but for you, the move of the sun into Cancer is wonderful because it's your 5th house. This is where you can showcase your warmth, your affection, your caringness, your playfulness, your sociability. You've also got Venus, the North Node, Uranus, midpoint in your 3rd house. Lots of bubbly conversations. It's also true that Neptune in your sign is forging a glorious link with Pluto, and that is very pleasing indeed. And in terms of your finances, I think of all the zodiac signs, yours may be looking a little bit brighter than some because of Mars and Jupiter being in your 2nd house. But they're also telling you don't be too sort of sloppy around spending decisions, because Jupiter can be sort of a bit reckless and Mars obviously is about need, like instant gratification. Pluto, of course, forges a terrific link with Venus. There could be a friend that can become so much more. I don't necessarily mean romantically, but it's possible. Or a long-term plan could be evolving for you, which can see you making the most of your financial resources. With Mercury in your 4th house, I think you are thinking a lot about your home and emotional situation. And I think Mars and Jupiter could provide the resources to make a change. It's just that with Saturn in the 12th house, there's part of you emotionally or psychologically that feels not at your most energized at the moment. So, you know, steer clear of those people who just are, you know, so happy to seize on a little tidbit of information. You you know, we all know the type of people. I used to have a neighbour that was like this, that was, you know, the most incredible gossip, but incredibly skilled at digging out bits of information. And then afterwards you think, well, I didn't actually want that person to know that. So I would be a little bit cautious about who you're sharing more confidential information with over this next 13-week period. But you can have some fun, but I think it needs to be fun with people that you can trust. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me for this summer solstice special. Please stay safe, take care, and goodbye for now.